All right, so let's dive right into this U.S.-China trade situation. You sent over some really interesting stuff, expert analysis, viewpoints from Chinese businesses. It's a lot.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here is that this isn't like just, your average trade disagreement. This is like round two.
Round two.
Yeah, of a trade war
Yeah.
between, the world's two biggest economies.
And round one, that was pretty intense, right? One of your sources said that China literally ran out of U.S. goods to put tariffs on last time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
They had basically put tariffs on like everything the U.S. was sending their way. And that really highlights something important here. China sells so much more to the U.S. than it buys from the U.S. I mean, think of it like a scale. One side is like loaded down with Chinese goods going to the U.S.
Right.
And the other side has like way less U.S. stuff going to China. And that's what we mean by a trade imbalance.
Okay, so the scale is tipped, and now the U.S. has just thrown another weight on their side by putting a 10% tariff on all Chinese goods. How has China reacted?
Well, their response has been surprisingly measured. Actually, instead of just mirroring the U.S. with these sweeping tariffs, they've targeted their retaliatory tariffs on about 30% of U.S. imports.
So they're being very specific about what they're hitting back on, almost like they're picking their battles.
Yeah, exactly. It suggests a more strategic approach, possibly to leave room for negotiation later on. They might be trying to avoid a full-on economic war, but still make it clear they're not going down without a fight.
And it's not just about tariffs, is it? One of the sources mentioned China launching investigations into American companies like Google. That feels very calculated.
Oh, absolutely. They're putting pressure in certain areas that they know matter to the U.S. It's like they're saying, hey, we're playing chess here, not checkers.
And speaking of pressure, you included a piece from a Chinese source that gives a really human perspective to all of this. It focuses on small and medium-sized manufacturers in China, and their anxieties are very real.
Oh, yeah, and understandably so. I mean, they're worried about losing U.S. sales, right? Because American buyers won't start looking for a cheaper alternative if prices go up because of the tariffs.
It's a powerful reminder that these aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. There are real people whose livelihoods are actually at stake.
And that source doesn't shy away from painting a pretty bleak picture, actually. They talk about job losses, wages going down, and the impact this could have on everyday life for Chinese workers. It's pretty sobering.
Definitely. But beyond the immediate economic impact, what does all of this mean for the overall relationship between the U.S. and China?
Well, there's a clear sense from these sources that the relationship is strained.
So this trade war isn't helping.
Not really. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is this idea that ultimately no one really wins a trade war. Both sides feel the pain.
Which makes you wonder, what's the end game here? Where does this all lead?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's where this deep dive gets really interesting. One of your sources suggested that China might actually be using this trade war to their advantage.
Hold on, you're saying they might be using this conflict to benefit themselves in the long run? Tell me more.
Well, think about it. Instead of reacting impulsively, they're responding with calculated restraint. They're choosing their battles carefully and potentially setting themselves up for a stronger position in the future.
Yeah.
It's almost like
they're playing the long game.
Exactly. And that's something we should definitely explore further. They're looking 10 steps ahead while everyone else is just focused on the immediate.
Okay, I'm starting to see what you mean. So instead of getting caught up in this tit for tat, they're playing it cool and thinking about the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that restraint could actually put pressure on the U.S. to rethink their approach. It's like they're saying, we're not going to panic. We're going to make smart moves and see who comes out on top.
So they're putting the ball back in the U.S.'s court by not overreacting.
Right. And this calculated approach could actually force the U.S. into a more negotiated settlement. If China can show that they can handle the heat and keep their economy relatively stable, the U.S. might be more willing to come to the table and work out a deal that benefits both sides.
So instead of a full-blown trade war, we might see more of a strategic back and forth, leading to some kind of compromise.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. But of course, we can't ignore the potential downsides.
Yeah.
Even with this more measured approach, this trade war could still hurt both economies.
Right. Businesses on both sides are feeling the pressure, and we're seeing prices go up.
Absolutely. And there's always the chance that things could escalate unexpectedly. Even if both sides are trying to be strategic, miscalculations can happen.
It's a tightrope walk.
It is. And that's why it's so important to remember that this situation is constantly changing.
Yeah.
It's not just some static standoff. Both sides are reevaluating their positions all the time, and things can shift depending on a lot of different factors.
So what should we be looking out for? Like, what are some signs that things might be headed towards a more cooperative resolution?
Well, keep an eye on what both governments are saying. Are they still digging in their heels, or are they starting to soften their stance? Any hints that they're willing to compromise, maybe through like back-channel negotiations?
And what about the economic side? What signals should we look for there?
Pay attention to the trade data. Are imports and exports between the two countries starting to level out? Are businesses finding ways to like adapt to the tariffs? Those are all things to watch.
Sounds like we're in for a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, you could say that. But that's exactly why it's so important to understand, like, what's driving this trade war. It's not just about following the headlines. It's about understanding the forces at play and being able to see what might happen next.
So how does all of this affect like the average person? I mean, this is happening on a global scale. How can we as individuals even make sense of it? And how might it impact us?
That's a great question. And it brings us back to one of the key takeaways from your sources. Trade wars have real-world consequences for everyone. Even if you're not directly involved in international trade, you'll probably feel the impact in your daily life.
Can you give us some examples? Like, what are some ways this trade war could actually trickle down and affect us?
Well, as we've said, tariffs can lead to higher prices for consumers.
Right?
If you buy goods that are imported from China, you might see those prices go up.
It's not just about consumer goods, though, is it?
Right. Think about all the industries that rely on imported materials from China. Those costs go up, and that could affect prices across the board.
So we could see everything from electronics to clothes getting more expensive.
Yeah, potentially. And those ripple effects can extend to jobs and even like the overall cost of living. If economic growth slows down, businesses might start laying people off, wages could stagnate, and it could become harder to just make ends meet.
So it's not just some abstract economic theory, it's about people's lives.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to stay informed and engaged. The more you understand about this trade war, the better you'll be able to make decisions about your finances, your career, even how you vote.
It's a powerful reminder that things happening on the other side of the world can have very personal consequences.
Absolutely. And it shows how important it is to think critically and do your own research. Don't just accept the headlines, dig a little deeper, look at different viewpoints, and come to your own conclusions.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some key takeaways you want our listener to remember?
First, this trade war is complex and always changing. There are no easy answers.
Okay. And second?
Pay attention to the signals coming from both sides. Look for signs of cooperation or signs that things are escalating. Try to figure out the motivations behind every move that the U.S. and China make.
And lastly?
Don't underestimate the impact this could have on you. Stay informed, be part of the conversation, and support policies that promote a stable economy and global cooperation.
Great points. But before we move on, there was one thing from the sources that really stuck with me.
Oh, tell me more.
It's this idea that China's measured response might actually be a part of a bigger strategy. Some experts believe they're using this trade war to show the world how strong their economy is and to establish themselves as a major global power.
Interesting. They might be using this conflict to like flex their muscles on the world stage.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if this trade war, despite all the bad stuff, could actually end up speeding up China's rise as a global economic superpower.
That's a question only time will answer.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something to think about.
So we've gone from specific tariffs to talking about the global balance of power. That's quite a journey. But it highlights something really important about these deep dives. It's not just about learning facts, it's about understanding the bigger picture.
You got it. That's what makes these conversations so rewarding. We start with something specific, like U.S.-China trade relations, and end up thinking about how global power works.
And it's pretty mind-blowing to think that decisions in Washington and Beijing could have such a huge impact on the whole world.
It reminds us how connected we all are. And it shows how important it is to stay informed, talk to each other, and think critically about what we see and hear.
Well said. We've covered a lot today, from the strategies of the U.S. and China to how this trade war could affect businesses and people all over the world. We even talked about the possibility of the balance of global power shifting.
And we talked about how this isn't something we just watch from the sidelines. These events have real consequences for everybody, and it's up to each of us to stay informed and engaged.
Exactly. So to our listener, we leave you with this. The U.S.-China trade war is far from over. It's a constantly changing situation that we all need to pay attention to. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep exploring how our world is connected. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
So we went from like tariffs to the global balance of power. That's wild, but it shows what these deep dives are all about. It's not just facts, it's the big picture. Yeah, that's what makes it fun. We start with U.S.-China trade and end up talking about, like, how power works in the world.
It's crazy, right? Decisions in Washington and Beijing affect everyone.
Makes you realize how connected we all are and why it's important to, like, stay informed, talk, and really think about what we're seeing.
Well said. Before we wrap up, I wanted to go back to something you said earlier about China being strategic and patient. What does that actually look like?
Well, first, it means not getting caught in that back and forth. Instead of those huge tariffs, they're focused on specific things, hitting back where it hurts the U.S. economy.
So it's precision, not just swinging wildly.
Right. They're also working hard to boost their own economy and rely less on the U.S. They're investing in tech, innovation, things to make them more self-sufficient.
So they're using this to become stronger, less dependent on others.
Yeah, like turning a problem into an opportunity. And it might work. If China can get through this and become even stronger economically, it could really change the world.
What about the U.S.? How are they adapting?
They're doing their own things. Diversifying supply chains, making more stuff at home, finding new trade partners.
So it's like both sides are moving the pieces on the board.
Exactly. And we don't know who'll win. It depends on politics, technology, even how people shop.
So it's not just about today's economy, but who's ready for the future.
Exactly. That's why we got to look past the headlines and think about the long game. This could change everything.
Lots to consider. So as we finish, what's the one thing you want our listener to remember?
This isn't just about money. It's about power. The U.S. and China are rivals, and whoever comes out ahead will change things for all of us.
Powerful stuff. And that's what the deep dive is about, connecting the dots, seeing the big picture, and giving our listeners the knowledge to understand this complicated world.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. The more you know, the better decisions you can make.
Well said. So listener, here's our final thought. The U.S.-China trade war is a long way from over. It's changing all the time, so stay curious, keep learning, and never stop exploring our world. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. See you next time.